So I'll just press record and say a big welcome to everybody. Thank you ever so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for giving up your time. We are Ambios Ltd. Just a couple of sentences. We're involved with nature conservation training and have been for nearly 20 years now, helping the next generation of wildlife professionals get the skills they need for employment. We run 2 tenancies on the Sharpham estate down in South Devon, and we are in the process of rewilding those. Hence, we had a launch event in January of this year before everything went completely crazy with COVID. And we were talking about how we were going to do landscape restoration, very small scale, 120 odd acres over time. And we kind of launched that event, and we sort of said at the time, well, be interesting if there was a network, you know, other people, so we could share experiences. And then it so happened that Rewilding Britain got in touch and said they were looking at similar things, networks through the country. And so after a few discussions with a few people, we said, well, we'll put out a survey and just see what people think about a network and what they would like to do with the network. And this evening, I'd like to share the results of that network, that survey with you. So I'm going to do a share screen so that we can start off. And I'm hoping that everybody can hear me. Give me a quick thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, that's great. Fantastic. So we're good to go. I'm now going to just make my screen so that it's a hide video panel, just so that it's good for the recording so people can see there's no disturbance to the images. Okay, so the idea for this evening really is to just talk about the local, maybe the Devon or whatever, rewilding network and the survey responses. 44 people responded from various organisations and individuals, and I'd just like to run you through the results there with a view to thinking about kind of what happens next. Before we do that, perhaps we just touch base on actually our objectives, as it were, for this evening, which is to look at those results. Perhaps talk about leading the network, how that might work, who might be involved in that in the coming days, months and years. The next step, if we are decided that a local network would be useful, and maybe the next meeting. So they're the kind of 4 things I'll come back to at the end, but that kind of sets the picture for what I'd like to do over the next few minutes. In talking to you, you'll, I'm sure, be familiar with Rewilding Britain. I just wanted to, as they are coordinating networks across the country, I just wanted to touch base with what their vision was for rewilding and what they regard as rewilding, because it has a particular, conjures up certain images, doesn't it, which we'll come to in the results of the meeting. So the vision of Rewilding Britain is to have at least 5% of Britain rewilding, and I was interested when I read that earlier. That's a very kind of active word, isn't it? Rewilding. Note the kind of tense there. So at least 5% rewilding. I'm sure you're familiar with this, and 25% returning to a broader mosaic of nature-friendly land and marine uses. So that's their vision. They define rewilding as restoring ecosystems to the point where nature can take care of itself and restoring our relationship with the natural world. That's how it's defined by Rewilding Britain. We may choose different definitions, personally, collectively, whatever, but that's what Rewilding Britain is saying. So let's have a look at the responses then to our survey. Now, we asked a whole range of different questions, from the very practical perhaps to the very evocative. So I'd just like to run you through the responses. And the first one is a very practical one. And why we're using Zoom to talk to you this evening is because we did ask people what was their primary means of communication systems that they used. I was interested to tease out whether people were using Microsoft Teams or Zoom, and you can see the percentages in front of you, I hope, on the screen. And of course, everybody uses email, but we thought it was really interesting just to pick that out. So by far the majority are using Zoom. Great, that means we were using it too. So it's a great medium to talk to you this evening. That's really useful. We had responses, as I said, from 44 different organizations, people, backgrounds, and here's the demographic. So we had land managers and farmers and social media influencers and trainers and teachers and all the rest you can see there on the screen: university people, rewilding enthusiastic, private landowners, those involved in gardening and horticulture as well. So a real broad range, which was great. I was really pleased with that, in terms of those that are interested in rewilding from many, many different perspectives. And we asked what led to your interest in rewilding. And there were sort of 4 key responses that came back, really grouping them. There was personal connections to rewilding. The idea that conventional conservation practices have not been meeting the challenges. An interest in alternatives to traditional farming. And some people have been inspired by visits to the classic kind of sites, Knepp Estate, and reading the Wilding book, of course, and Feral. So that they were your primary sources, if you like, for being interested in rewilding. So I'm just going to see if I can, my toolbar here is creating some confusion for me to see. There we go. Is there a distinction between rewilding and habitat restoration? We asked people what they felt about that. And you can see there that some people felt that habitat restoration is more a managed approach for certain species and habitats, while rewilding is dynamic and open-ended. That's a really interesting, just captures a sort of essence of what people were saying. That wilding looks forward and not backwards. So I guess that's the idea of nature conservation being about conserving a particular point in time that we might choose, that we want to go back to. This idea that the wilding is about looking forward. And perhaps that it's an umbrella term. And when we were talking about, is there a distinction? As you can see there in the pie chart, most people thought that there was. So that's an interesting result. So something about this term rewilding and the difference between that and habitat restoration. So then we wanted to drill into that a little bit and just wanted to ask people if they could see any challenges with the term rewilding. And you can see immediately there, many people thinking there was. Perhaps that it's too broad or that it's a loaded term. And it is one of those terms that sort of got very rapidly, hasn't it, into use certainly in our sector, nature conservation sector, and that it means different things to different people, which is partly why I wanted to touch base with Rewilding Britain and their definition at the beginning this evening. And maybe it is loaded, and maybe it is an unfortunate term to be used in certain circumstances. And certainly when we were investigating our project down at Sharpham, we were, this came up in conversation. We were warned that this term rewilding could be quite emotive for some audiences, and it is a concern, and we do need to take that on board. We asked people if they knew of any good examples of rewilding, and 68% identified examples spread across the UK. And you can see we've done a little map there of where people had been inspired by rewilding, and also people were mentioning significant places abroad. So that was Vaardersplassen in the Netherlands, and Yellowstone National Park were also examples. So people, again, drawing on experiences from both in the UK and abroad in terms of their understanding of rewilding. So we asked you who's currently rewilding. And we had some interesting results. So 26%, you can see there, of people who rewilding their garden. And again, we were trying to pick out the sort of scales of rewilding that was going on here. 26% rewilding their garden, 52% other than garden. And then we've got some percentages that are not applicable or not yet. And obviously there were some people, such as teachers and professional educators, that wouldn't necessarily be actively involved with their own land. So that's why we're getting those percentages appearing. And those researching or actively rewilding, 44% researching and 56% actually actively involved. So the majority of you are actually actively involved in some form or another. And how many sites, we asked. We've got the not applicable, so that's those that don't have access particularly to a specific site. But again, the majority involved with single sites, and some other folks with multiple sites, mostly woodland, pasture, scrub, and some gardens at single site level. I guess the multiple sites are perhaps some of the bigger organisations, the Wildlife Trusts and others. And this was the interesting thing, and this is, again, this is partly a motivator for sort of doing the survey in the beginning, really, was to find out approximately what kind of area people who were involved in rewilding. And for the responses that we received, you can see there quite dramatically that it's small sites. And I was talking to somebody earlier today, and I had an email in earlier today about small sites, people really keen to say, how can we support small sites? A lot of the rewilding talk at the moment is obviously about landscape scale, obviously about large scale. And we had a kind of a hunch that it might be a bit smaller scale, particularly in the UK, in Devon. And so that would appear to be the case from the data set that we received, from the responses that we received. So our relatively small scale, and indeed we would fall into that. So we're 120 acres, so we would be in that 20% category. So that was really interesting to get some feel for the size of projects that were going on, particularly in the county. And then we asked, well, what kind of geographic scale would you see a network? If you're interested in a network, how would you see that working? What kind of scale would you see it working at? And a third of people said at county level. We had a whole range of responses, which was really interesting, up from river catchment scale to regional. So lots of different ideas about what a local network might look like and how big it might be. But there was a sort of a solid 33% there who said, well, maybe the county level is good. So interesting feedback. What value do you see in a local network then? Why should we have a local network? And these were the key 6 points that came out really from all the responses. Sharing information and ideas and expertise and resources, and that resources potentially including machinery and livestock for grazing. Creating a network of habitats, spreading best practice and professional expertise, sharing the load, working together, expanding the network, connecting like-minded people, and then public and landowner engagement and involvement. So these were the things that you thought were valuable for a network to be engaged with. What would you be prepared to put into a local network? So 61% responded to this question, with majority talking about sharing information and expertise, but with time, volunteering and spreading the word. And a small group of people were interested in actually putting in some land. And there was a desire for practical action and sharing experiences. This was the theme that kept coming up through the responses that we had. And indeed, again, we had a kind of hunch that this was something that, you know, that might be the case, but it's interesting to see it actually coming through in the survey, reassuring. What would you like to get out of a local network? 57% response here. And it was about knowledge and advice and support and some real results to increase biodiversity on the ground. We certainly support that, but that would be, seems to be a really important underlining thing that you would like to get out of a network. But the knowledge and advice and support being a key to it. And that's what good networks are all about, isn't it, really? So then we turned and asked you about the funding. How would we fund the administration? And we had a 48% response to that question. And in descending order of popularity, you can see there, membership fees, grants, event attendance, donations, and no need. Well, we've had some interesting discussions, and I should have mentioned at the beginning, and it slipped my mind, actually. We've had some great support. We've had some great support from the Woodland Trust, and Woodland Trust are really interested in being involved in a local network in some way, and sadly they can't be with us this evening. I don't think they're here, sadly, but they will be watching the recording, and we're having discussions later in the week. But I think there is a need to have some sort of administrative structure to it. That would be my sense, and the most popular way to do that might be through a membership fee. Certainly that's the information that's come through from the results of this survey. Should the network be independent or under an umbrella? And you can see there 41% responded, and in descending order of priority, most people thought it should be independent. And that's good food for thought there as to how that might happen. Next was under the umbrella, and then some people weren't sure. So we asked about natural links with existing organisations. And people were defining and drawing out some natural links, descending order of popularity. The Wildlife Trust, yep, guys, Rewilding Britain were the two that kind of stood out. Natural links, and then with other organisations, National Trust, Woodland Trust, National Parks, West Country Rivers Trust, all mentioned. So we put in a bunch of logos just so you could identify them quickly. But people thinking that there are obviously natural links through to those organisations. So what could the network provide? Now, we had a lot of different responses. So we had obviously the 44, and there were almost, you know, the same number of responses to what could the network provide. So we did a little analysis and we set an 80% threshold. If 80% of people were saying the same thing, then we got this list. So what could the network provide? Information, sharing ideas, advice and guidance, networking and support, and maybe site visits and walks and talks. So they were the things that the network was saying, this is what we, you know, really could provide and what we could do with. Networking opportunities, again, lots and lots of different ideas, and we took a 80% threshold and just got the top 4. So the network opportunities to provide a newsletter, maybe short email updates, maybe webinars, and maybe site visits. So again, I guess if you were thinking about what a network might look like, then we're getting those core ideas kind of coming through in the responses to the survey. When asked whether there was anything else you'd like to see of the network, the kind of the most amusing response, and one of the few actually, was coffee with Alistair Driver. So there we go. Sorry, Alistair can't join us tonight, but we will be passing that information back to him. So that was the sort of, have you anything else to add response? Would you be interested in contributing to a map of local networking sites or local rewilding sites? We wanted to ask that question because we did think maybe that could be a useful resource. And there are obviously some issues, sensitivities around that in terms of the location of sites, and we completely understand that. You can see there on the pie chart the response to that question. So 42% saying yes, interested, and then a 37% saying, well, we really need a few more details, which is fair enough. We didn't have any sense of detail at that time. It was just an idea that we put out there, mindful of the sensitivities around locations and how the map might be published, etc. So that's the results of the survey itself. A whole bunch of different ideas there, and some useful kind of steers and guidance. And as I was saying, we have been talking to the Woodlands Trust. They are interested in helping potentially with the administration. As Ambios, we don't necessarily see ourselves involved in actually administering the network into the future. Our role's been to facilitate it, and we're quite happy to do that. Until this point, and we're kind of thinking, well, we're happy to run with trying to set something up, thinking about what might happen with the next steps and maybe the next meeting. But as we run into Easter next year, we'd be thinking we'd want to hand it over to another organisation to take on because of our other priorities. You may be aware, and I'm sure you are aware, I'm just flagging this up just to make sure that Rewilding Britain has set up on its site the Rewilding Network page, and on that page you will see various counties at sort of fledgling stage of network, and indeed Devon has a holding page at the moment. So again, one could see that there may not necessarily be a need to establish a website for a Devon or locally to Devon network, because the infrastructure is already being provided by Rewilding Britain. So obviously there'd be a choice there about whether to engage with that. So I said, very grateful to the Woodland Trust for supporting us. If you want to know a little bit about more them or us, they're the website addresses. That is a summary of the results of the survey that we did. And now I think it's time to take some soundings from your good selves about ideas, about the way the network might go forward, about what your thinking is, so that we can begin perhaps to move forward a little bit and think about what a network might look like, and when and if people might like to move it forward. So I'm kind of opening it to the floor. If you would like to raise a hand, open your microphone, we can by all means start sharing ideas, or you can type it in the chat and I can then repeat it out to people, however you want to do it. Entirely up to you. Anybody like to start us off?
Simon, I'll kick things off. Thanks very much indeed for your efforts there in putting that together. That was excellent. One of the things that I've been reflecting on is that I was fortunate to visit Holland something like 20 years ago now,
yeah.
And presented to English Nature at the time the idea for a national ecological network. And we've gone the circle many times and we're still going around it. What I'd really like to suggest is that we get the Dutch over to talk about their experiences of the Dutch ecological network. Because my understanding is that it has been very powerful and it's worked in part, but it has come unstuck a little bit just recently, I think, with changes in government policy and funding landscape. And I think it would be really excellent to hear from them.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Simon. I think, yes, it's been some years. I did have the chance to go to Svalbard Plaza some years ago and talk to the guys over there who were dealing with a particular circumstance. And I think it's a lovely European project, and it would be really interesting, I think, post-COVID to speakers over, and that would perhaps that's an interesting function of the local network, to be able to do that and facilitate that. But it is a great idea, and there's nothing like, you know, learning from people who have done some of this kind of stuff before and engaged with that kind of thing before. Would be very interesting. Yeah. Okay, so that's something that we can write on an action list to you know, to start us off. Could we ask them to join a webinar? That's a good idea. That's a great idea. Thank you, John, for that. Yeah, we could. That would be a nice one to set up, actually, wouldn't it? That would be a nice one to set up. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think once the group is established, and I think when it comes to talks and webinars, then I think probably it'd be you could quite quickly establish a waiting list of different people we might like to hear from, and certainly they would be high on that list. But I'm imagining that there could be lots of opportunities from other networks and Rewilding Britain, and, you know, other folks who are involved locally within the county to share experiences, maybe this way, but hopefully face to face as well post COVID. Yeah, fantastic. Anybody else? Yes, Andy, go. Yeah. Hello.
What about a list of volunteers in their geographical location? I mean, speaking as a landowner, it would be useful to be able to tap into tree planters and things like that.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. That's a fantastic idea. I think, yes, absolutely. It sort of touches on this issue of mapping a little bit, doesn't it? Of like people's locations. And I think if people were willing for that information to be held by a network and shared, then that's the kind of thing where you could start to make those connections. Absolutely. And I think, you know, I imagine that this is going to be a little bit like potentially a snowball rolling down a hill. Once we sort of go out, once we've established a network and that information starts to go out, then hopefully more and more people would start to engage with it. But that's a great idea, and would certainly, I guess, be really useful to landowners such as yourself. Yeah. Okay, I've just had another message. Opportunity to engage with network with Elms to encourage subsidy funding for rewilding. Yes. Okay. Thanks, Jack. Yep.
Can I just say, I think yes. my concern would be with sort of aligning ourselves with an existing conservation body would be that the bystander effect would kick in. So we'd be feeling that somebody else is going to do it for us. And I think probably now is the time to be looking at individual action. Also, the other point I would make is that what I've been working on is trying to get sort of, for instance, more trees, more meadows, and Devon Hedge Group working together and signposting people to them. And I really feel strongly that there's no point in reinventing the wheel. And I think, you know, we can all tap into that really. I mean, certainly what we're finding, because we have a rewilding site here, which was kindly supported by More Trees, is that we're having a hell of a lot of interest. But I guess my question would be for you is are you looking to go along the sort of Somerset wildlands idea, where you're looking at purchasing land as well as sort of a traditional network?
Interesting, great question. My sort of feeling was that it really depended on the network. It was a network choice to make those kind of decisions. If I put a personal hand up within the network, then I imagined it to be just a network, nothing more than a network. So going back to the feedback we had from the survey, that it would be about sharing ideas, potentially sharing resources, signposting, as you say, signposting people to different resources, rather than it actually taking on a sort of entity of itself and actually engaging with land management or land purchase in that way. That's my opinion. But I was also conscious that it really should grow from those that were involved in the network. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Hello, Debs. Hello.
Hi. Hello. Hi. I don't know. I'm not sure sort of how it might fit in, but actually, with what I did, we actually are an environmental facilitation community organisation. So what we do at the moment is we work with people who want to carry out something, and we help them to plan, deliver, and fund it. And we also run the Nature Networks project, which is where we map people's activities for nature. So where we're working with anyone who wants to make that carry out something, we've got a team of fundraisers and people who are here able to provide that support. My other half, Kevin Rylands, is also an environmental advisor as well. And he supports with that as well. So we're here able already to give that advice and to carry out that planning and facilitation of projects for those that aren't quite as ready to make that change as some of the people already in this group, which might be cool.
Fantastic. Sounds absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. There's sort of Devon Birds. We've got the Devon Birds recorder here as well. So
oh, great. Okay.
Yeah, might be if we'd be able to link in with them as well, and other sites
Brilliant.
we're already working with.
Yeah. I think it goes back to what we were just saying perhaps previously, links back to the idea that if we make people aware of these things through the network, that then they could come to you directly, just as volunteers might go to a landowner directly, etc. So as that sort of network information flow starts to happen, I guess, then lots of things can be connected and facilitated.
Absolutely, yeah. And obviously we're already insured to work with practical volunteers as well.
Oh, brilliant! Yeah,
with the expertise. Fantastic. Those work parties, so hopefully we can be useful to the network.
Yeah, absolutely superb. Yeah, sounds great to me. Sounds very exciting. Thank you. So that's really great. Okay, sorry, I'm just looking at a couple of questions coming here. How would this link into Nature Recovery Network for Devon? Yes, identifying good sites for linking and corridors, etc. Yeah. How would it? I think it. Yes, interesting, isn't it? I think it sort of goes back a little bit to this idea of mapping and that information about where people are and how big their sites are, and then that sort of feeds through, and then the network can have access to that potentially if people are happy to release their information, and then those connections can start to be made once one sort of sees it as a geographical presentation. Okay, so another one coming in. Year 2. Okay, so Fee's just saying here, just in case people aren't aware, there's an EU-funded 2-year rewilding scheme going on in Plymouth. Oh yes, at the moment, including creating corridors and identifying wildlife sites. Yeah, okay. Project's called Green Minds because of the need to get everyone, especially city folk, thinking about ecological ways. Yeah, brilliant. So again, there's another example of a project that I hadn't heard of, and that's really interesting. So that you can see an example, I suppose, of how that networking, how just being here this evening can start to make those connections. And I think as that grows, and maybe that's where you get into things like emails coming through, bits of information, maybe you go to newsletters, etc., that kind of thing. But making those kind of connections, I guess, is what we're suggesting might be useful to people. And I get a sense from the responses from the survey and just the limited chats we've had this evening already that there is a sense in which people feel a network might be useful. It's just a question of what it exactly looks like.
Simon.
Yeah.
Hi, Simon.
Yes. Yep.
Just on that network of what it actually looks like.
Yeah.
An example, one that already exists, the Royal Geographical Society have an online forum called Basecamp. I don't know if you know about this, but it could work the network could work in a similar way. So they have an online forum, and then you're grouped into your county. And then this would be quite good into what Andy Gray just said about knowing where volunteers are and who wants to volunteer. And then you can put your area in at your own discretion. So you can choose to share your map and location. And then you can see projects or opportunities within your local area. I think the only barrier would be getting things like the EU project and Green Minds and like your project all on the same page. But if you coordinated them all to, I mean, it's set up by an institution, which is the downfall there. But if you had a body that was willing to take it on, like the Woodland Trust or something nationwide, like Rewilding Britain, if they founded the forum, it would be sent out on an emailing system particular to your county, so you wouldn't get flooded with loads of emails. And their volunteering system, their opportunities, and people that want to say, oh, I've got a piece of land that you can do this on, they then contact the forum, and then the forum administrator says, right, this opportunity has come up, it's here, who would like to volunteer for it. So that's how their network currently works, and it might work, a similar model might work for this.
Nice.
Just a thought.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that, Maddie. I think absolutely right. And in a sense, I think what's happening here as well is Rewilding Britain is starting to establish some of that stuff. So you were saying about, the RGS, establishing that a sort of forum, and I get a sense that Rewilding Britain is there perhaps to facilitate some of this stuff, just as you're saying, and maybe we have an opportunity to influence some of that, or certainly suggest where it would help for local networks. So I think next year is going to be quite an exciting year for all the networks. And certainly if there's a local Devon network that comes into existence, then that idea of potentially using some of the national Rewilding Britain functionality, if you like, or administration could well be part of it. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, somebody else.
Simon, it has that element of scale.
Yes,
it has that element of scale when breaking it down from national.
Yeah. Yes.
Down into local to Devon to Plymouth.
Gotcha. Yes. Okay, that's interesting. Right. Okay. Yeah. So you're coming down to sub-county level. Yeah, that's interesting. Networks able good news and successes. Yeah. Okay. So Fia's saying here, a network enables good news and successes to spread, and that's incredibly important for keeping people's morale up. Yes, absolutely. I agree with you 100%, 110%. Indeed, spreading those conservation, the positive stories, really, really important. Yep. Okay, so Tracy's saying yes, local versus county, national scale, perhaps use different tools depending on, so I think that's what you're saying as well, Maddie, that's different, depending on the scale, different tools might be used. Yep, brilliant. Yeah, so there's
Simon, can I come back in just briefly?
Yes, do. Simon.
Is there a clear steer from Rewilding Britain and Alistair at the national level about what they want from these local networks? Well, for example, I'm assuming that Rewilding Britain's at the national scale is going to take the lead role in terms of policy change and influencing MPs, for example.
Yes. Yes, I think the quick answer to your question is that all that Rewilding Britain said to us was, look, it would be really great if you can just share our vision, just so that you sort of, so that people can get a sense of where we're at and decide whether they want to be on the same page. But other than that, they've been really open and just kind of, you know, each county will kind of take its own, if it's county, you know, so even a question on that. Each local network will begin to take on its own identity, and we don't really have any sort of you know, framework for that. We'll just go with what people want locally, and absolutely they'll be doing the sort of the campaigning, the big hitting, I suppose, big political hitting, if you like, as you were suggesting. Absolutely. And then we might take on similar at county level if the network decided that was a function. But other than that, actually, they're just saying, you know, it's up to the individual local networks to decide what they want to do. They've got them. They're certainly happy to make suggestions, and certainly, you know, when we were setting this meeting up, I was saying to Sarah, who's the networking coordinator at Rewilding Britain, you know, would you, if we had another meeting in January as a sort of some kind of a launch, whatever that looks like, would you come down or come in on the meeting, on the webinar, and just tell us a little bit about Rewilding Britain and what's happening? And Sarah's really happy to do that. Alistair's on standby if we want him to have a cup of coffee sometime. So, you know, they're very supportive, but they're recognizing that they are the umbrella organisation. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, just.
Can I just say? Can I just say something?
Yes. Hello.
Along those
Yes.
lines? Could I just make a comment along those lines?
Please.
Hi. Yeah, I contacted Rewilding Britain some time ago about starting a network, and they were telling me that the Yorkshire county were starting a network, and so they're a few months ahead of us. And it might be interesting to find out what they're doing and what's working and what isn't working. They're a few months ahead of us. They might, you know, it's no point in reinventing the wheel, really. Would be interesting to know that. The other thing to say was, if we are mostly consisting of small areas of land, I think there would be a lot of value in the organisation talking to other landowners and trying to persuade other landowners to come in on it, so that we can create corridors. Because I'm a bit afraid that if there's lots of us in the county or in the area and we've all got small areas of land, it's not really going to do much good unless we can join up somehow. So that would be, I don't know how on earth we're going to organise all these different ideas. But anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Brilliant. No, Sarah, thank you ever so much. Yeah, so two things. Yes, absolutely. As you identified, Yorkshire is ahead. When I asked whether Yorkshire, what lessons have been learnt from Yorkshire, I was actually told that it was so early, even though they're ahead of us, that actually they weren't sure there were any lessons at the moment, because they were just beginning to get together, which is quite interesting. But you know, they are ahead of us. I had a really interesting meeting with a bunch of people through Rewilding Britain who were representing different networks from across the country. And one of those individuals had gone through a process with a slightly different group, but actually had a sort of a single side of A4 what this network actually agrees to do, support each other and meet up effectively. And I noticed that's now appeared on Rewilding Britain website under the network thing. So people are moving forward, yes, at different rates, but I think still very fledgling. But I will go back and ask again what's happened to Yorkshire. And find out, as you say, is absolutely right. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. Your second point about connecting up, and I think is absolutely, spot on. And wouldn't that be a lovely thing to do for the network to do, to actually take that on board? And again, it goes a little bit back to that map and that understanding the geography. And when we understand the geography, perhaps then we then know where the gaps are to begin to make those corridors. So if that is an ambition, if that turns out to be an ambition of the network, then sort of understanding the landowner demographic between 2 points we know about would be really useful. So I keep in my head, I keep coming back to this idea of it would be really useful for the network, the local network, to have a map of where these sites are. That seems to me to be the a starting point, particularly addressing, as you quite rightly identify, that idea of making corridors. And, you know, yes, isolated sites, great, but actually not a long-term thing. Perhaps we want to move away from that a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so thank you. That's great. Next, sorry,
thanks,
yes,
Simon. Thanks, Mike Moser here. Really interesting, helpful presentation. I think one of the reasons why a network's important and why having a sort of a central point that's got some resource to actually put into it is because, you know, there is so much going on. Obviously, the local nature partnerships are thinking a lot about this. There's the nature recovery network that's being developed at the moment. There are virtually all the protected landscapes are in the process of developing nature plans. We are just initiating work on a nature plan for the North Devon biosphere, which covers a big area of the North Devon area. So you know, there is a really big sort of networking function there to get the concept of wilding, rewilding into all of those mechanisms. Now, whether that can be done by a volunteer-led network, I don't know. I mean, there are some organisations that do it very effectively. The Devon Hedge Group, Orchards Live, they're all volunteer-led. They do great stuff, and I personally am actually in favour of having it independent. I think my ideal solution would probably be an independent network that's funded by someone like the Woodland Trust to get on and do it. You know, that would be my ideal network. So just a few thoughts there.
No, that's great. No, thank you, Mike. I mean, really interesting, and I think quite a strong point at the end there. And I think it's sort of it's difficult, this balance where you know, it's about volunteers coming forward and having time, you know, versus that administrative sort of backup. And there's something there that we need to sort out. But perhaps the idea of independent, and that message has come through, hasn't it? Clearly in the response to our survey as well. So we'll kind of feed that in and see what happens. Okay, a few other messages coming in.
Simon, it's
yes. Yes.
It's David Appleton.
David, hello.
Following on Mike's point there, that there's so much around the moment building, as the reason we're all together is such a new term. It's so diverse. I think this combination actually reflects what people think of as the term rewilding. And the interesting thing for me here is that there's a collection of both professionals and amateurs, if you like, really landowners. So we need to work out what we need as a group. We're never going to be able to compete, or probably wouldn't want to compete with some of the larger organisations. So I wonder whether actually the role that we could take is information sharing and knowledge of what works. And Andy was saying about landowners and that sort of thing. That's the bit for me that seems to be missing. And I quite often get involved in quite a lot of these debates nationally, and it's always that landowner, how does it work? What do you do? Works, what doesn't work? So if we can identify our niche, then we'll fit in. Otherwise, we'll just be duplicating, I think.
Yes. Brilliant. Thank you, David. Yes, absolutely. And again, a strong sense coming through from the survey and from discussions, just anecdotal discussions with other people, would align with exactly what you're saying. That sort of thirst for connection, spreading of knowledge and advice. How do you actually go about it? Whatever rewilding means in whatever context. You know, what are the options? What's worked for different people? Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting. So just got a question come in here. Can we tell from the survey results or from people tonight what the headline rewilding projects in the Devon region? Oh, that's an interesting question. Yes. So I don't think so. Is there a headline rewilding project in the region or in Devon? That is a really interesting question. And I don't know whether any folks would like to nominate any rewilding projects for that. I can't think of one that springs to mind. I don't think we can tell from the survey results.
I would like, Simon, can I interrupt you?
Please.
I'd like to use that question to illustrate the difficulty that I have got. I work with a project which you and I would probably describe as rewilding. but it's on land owned by Dartmoor National Park, and they could not remotely use that term in connection with that land because of the relationships they have to maintain. And I saw on the chat an interesting question from Helen, I think it was, about rewilding on the commons.
Yes.
And that is precisely the reason why the national park cannot use that term, is that they are quietly trying to negotiate with the commoners a gradual restoration of nature on the commons.
Right.
Now, I've been to a number of Commoners Council meetings at which the word rewilding is used, and it's a red rag to a bull. It really is. I mean, rewilders are the enemy. Let me not understate that. And so while I would love to tell you where a particular project is that I work in, I cannot do that in the context of rewilding.
Yes.
Because I'm hoping we will use that project as an exemplar as Elms develops. And the National Park is very closely involved in the development of elms on Dartmoor. But they have to go unbelievably carefully, and that would hold me back. So I'd be much happier with it. I mean, Simon very early on in the chat said, you used the word ecological network.
Yes.
We talked about nature restoration networks. These are more neutral terms which I could get away with. I couldn't get away with rewilding.
That's absolutely fascinating, Tim. It's great. And I was going to say, so what is the solution to that? And you've just answered that question. So that's really interesting. And then I think it's sort of how does that fit with a journey that may or may not take you back to an organization called Rewilding Britain. It's a tough one, isn't it? It's a tough one. So in a sense, you're in favor with a landscape restoration or nature restoration type, what do you call it, title, label? That would be your preferred option.
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Not the first, and I'm sure you won't be the last. Really interesting point. And I think we have tussled with it. And it's interesting. I thought it was interesting that Isabella's Trees book was called Wilding and not Rewilding. So I think there are some sensitivities, and I completely understand where you're coming from there. Yeah. Okay. So that was an interesting question about, and you touched on it, didn't you, about common land. I'm just flicking through. There's been so many questions in the chat. Here we go. What's happening on common land? Well, you may have hinted at that, Tim. Okay. Assisted corridors. So we were thinking about whether or not there was an iconic project or biggest or headline project in Devon, and maybe there is, maybe there isn't.
I would just say, I think actually there's a danger of saying there's one project. I think I've set up a role as parish nature warden, so I'm looking at that on a parish basis, and I think there's a really useful thing to be able to look at scale. So for instance, we have 16 acres which we are rewilding, and people who have 2 acres think, oh no, we can't do that, and then we sort of look at people with 100 acres, and I think it's like Debs is saying, you want to need examples of gardens and so people can see it's relevant to them, really.
Absolutely, yes. Thanks, Kate. I think you're right. I mean, and I think it's very interesting. I think taking it right down to that micro scale is really important, actually, because it's a means of engaging people with the process. So I think that's right. And I think the other question here that was coming through about is there a project is really about is it possible to signpost those who are interested to a project that is happening, some sort of example. And again, I think I go back to the sort of map, really, whatever the map is called, that would perhaps help with that. Okay, was there
Simon, can I just...
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Gavin, go.
Yeah, just a point, follow up the point I was making. I've got at least 2, possibly nearly half a dozen smallish estates in the Blackdown Hills, where basically they're not relying on the land for their income, so they can afford to play around, if that's not a pejorative term, and they could be looking to go down that route, but they need to be able, well, it'd be very helpful to be able to go and look at farmed land that was going in a rewilding direction. Someone who'd taken the big NEP style choice,
yes,
even on a much smaller scale,
yeah,
to actually take farmland out of production and go
yes,
for rewilding. So there was a practical example to go and look at.
okay,
And I took a group to NEP
yep,
earlier this autumn,
yep,
and that was great as far as
yep,
it went. But obviously,
yes,
having something more local
interesting.
would
So
be
we need
valuable.
to get to Derek Gow's then,
Well, I was
obviously,
just, yeah,
because
yep.
he's doing it with 300 acres and he really knows his stuff.
Yeah, I was just going to say, absolutely. You know, there are members, potentially members we can bring into the network, and Derek, who would be to see, absolutely. You know, it's a good example. If you want a smaller example, bring him down to Sharpham. You know, but that's Derek is probably a good place to start. It might be slightly closer geographically, but you'd be very welcome to come down to Sharpham and see what we're doing there. Again, it depends on sort of their direction of travel, what they're interested in, where they see their future. Different examples, I'm sure, and I have a sense there may be others that, you know, I think that Derek is aware of other people that are operating on a similar or smaller scale to what he's doing, who just perhaps, going back to Tim's point, perhaps not quite ready to declare their rewilding because of the association, yeah, but actually, you know, under the sorts of definitions we're talking about, probably are, but don't want to use that term. So I think this will hopefully start to change, and we'll start to find our way through that. I think the short answer to your question is there are examples, absolutely, and certainly we'd be happy to host you down at Sharpham. Okay, just having a quick look. Yeah, people mentioning Derek Gow, and maybe beavers on the River Otter. Okay, fair enough. Derek Gow, yep. What we might not have is the NEP style conservation. No, sure. Large scale, perhaps we're not quite as big as NEP, but you know, perhaps collectively we might be when we're all joined up. I think one of the things that I am conscious of, and I think a couple of people have touched on it as well, is the sort of the existing networks. So the nature partnerships and you know, the other networks that exist. And again, just a little bit mindful of this idea of reinventing the wheel. You know, actually, is there an existing network that one might be associated with that would be interested in this, but haven't had a chance to explore it in any detail? That's some work for the future, I think. Okay, there's a nice reference here. Somebody suggesting maybe a link across to the National Garden Scheme. That's quite interesting in terms of very, very small scale restoration. I think the other sense as well I get is that actually when people are operating at what Rewilding Britain might describe as micro scale, it's actually really useful for Rewilding Britain to understand that there are a body of people that are doing that, and that actually it will have to fit into their future narrative. So I think it's quite useful to feed that back to them as well. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, and a little bit about wildlife gardening that's happening perhaps in Exeter, garden scale, personal, yep, relatable, absolutely. Yep, something else that we need to explore. Okay. Yeah.
I don't know them. Yeah, I was going to just say that. I mean,
yeah.
One of the things we would really feel we're at the point now is looking at, yeah, because obviously we're only 16 acres, but and we used to be sheep graze pasture, and it's sort of looking at herbivores and sort of carrying capacity of the land, really, and that's sort of the question we're up against at the moment, and whether we can almost have like a, I know that cows in clover are down in your area, I think, but so sort of like roving cattle, which we can sort of ship into a piece of land and move them around, really, and get them off again quite quickly, so that we're doing sort of some quite good you know, processes coming on board, really. So that's something we're really interested in, really, is working with other landowners, and certainly, like saying in the Black Downs, if you look at examples, you know, NEP style sort of challenges for smaller scale projects.
Absolutely agree, and really fascinating, Kate, and it's something that we're engaged with on the Sharpham estate in the context of pigs. So actually, there's a lovely lady that's on the edge of Dartmoor who actually effectively rents out pigs. We're hiring in a couple of pigs next year just for 21 days in an electric fence enclosure, because of this issue about being small scale. You know, we can't it's not practical for us to have pigs all year round. That presents us with a whole load of other complicated issues. So actually we just want them for a small amount of time, and you can see, can't you, how there might be the opportunity for some enterprising folk to actually do rentable grazers, or, you know, rentable pigs, you know, whatever, for the small scale people, because we don't want them all year round, and if we had them all year round, that's a big hassle. So I can see an enterprise growing out of that, and the network, of course, would be a lovely place to bring that together. So I think very much on my mind. I'll let you know how we get on with pigs, but it follows that sort of similar thing. You know, as you say, what's next up, as it were. You know, having had pigs, are we talking about large herbivores or whatever? So some interesting stuff around that to develop, I think. Okay, so somebody's saying that Derek Gow's developing a bison sharing scheme. Brilliant, classic. Well done, Derek. Yes, okay, so Debs is just saying about just thinking about management of volunteers, and I agree that needs careful coordination, careful management and leadership in terms of networking and partnerships. So that's a really important point. Thank you for sharing that. Pigs rewilding at Killerton. Okay, that's oh, that's interesting. Right. Okay, thank you for that, Simon. Okay, we'll come back to that. As pigs specific to Sharpham. Okay. Yes. Okay. Somebody asking about water buffalo. Same principle. I mean, once you've got, you know, your animal that certainly for the small scale wildlife restoration, habitat restoration projects. You have those animals that really only want them around for short periods of time, then why not have somebody who's got the space to keep them and basically rent them out to the various different projects? I think it's a lovely idea. Whether it's possible, I don't know. Theoretically, you could do that with a state team. You know, and in fact, for those of you like me who perhaps a little older, you can see from my grey hair, remember BTCV, who became TCV, the Conservation Volunteers. You know, they were a roving volunteer conservation group, and they would come and help different projects. And, you know, I can see that model. You could see that operating across Devon with rewilding, wilding projects or whatever, the same thing. You know, guys turn up in a minibus and they help you with your hedge laying, go somewhere else and maybe they, you know, help with a bit of strimming or whatever, heaven forbid. But, you know, that kind of idea of having a roving estate team. So I think there's lots of exciting possibilities, and perhaps the network provides the forum for that. Okay, brilliant. I'm conscious that I've grabbed everybody's time this evening, and so thank you ever so much for coming online, sparing the time. I think the final thing, I guess, just to wrap up, is that I get a kind of sense just from the people that have kind of given their time this evening that people are interested in a network and interested in the sharing of knowledge and developing ideas. And I guess you know, if you agree that that's the takeaway message, then I will take that away. We'll chat to Woodland Trust, who are, you know, helping us think about this, and we'll kind of walk towards perhaps getting some sort of network established. And again, you know, it might need hopefully a very simple few paragraphs just to describe. I really like this model that I've seen, which is really just about initially just about a network agreeing to come together and support each other and share ideas. It's just on a single side of A4, and perhaps that's something that we might share before an initial kickoff meeting sometime in late January, February next year, and sort of take it from there and see if people are interested in that. And then, as I say, it's up to the network then just to decide what it wants to be. I'm very conscious. I don't want to project, you know, my ideas, you know, my structure onto something that we collectively need to decide. Yeah. Although there has to be a little bit of that just to get it going, which is what we've done, which is why we stepped forward and said we'd do the survey, and do this evening. And we'll probably volunteer to do the next one just to get it going. Yeah, but actually our as Ambios Nature Conservation Training Organisation, our role then would be to step back and to say, okay, it's over to now the collective network to decide how this is going to work, either independently or under the umbrella of, or whatever. Quite happy to do that. But I sense a collective liking for the idea of a network across the county. Would you agree with that? If you can react with a thumbs up or something, then that would give me an indication that you're thinking a network in principle would be something that you're interested in doing. Okay, bless you. Thank you. Yeah. or stick it in the chat. Let's meet as soon as we can if COVID permits, absolutely, in the field. Wouldn't that be lovely to organise an actual physical meeting? Love to do that. Swapping emails, really happy to do that if people are okay. What we will do probably is email out to you like the Zoom meeting. Perhaps we'll just over the coming days, maybe on Friday of this week or at some point, just email out just to check with you you're happy for us to share your email with, and then that starts to connect people together. And then we kind of move from there really and see how we go. I'd like to help set up a visit with CIM. Okay, yes, okay, that's great. Yeah, okay, so CIM, the Chartered Institute of Environmental and Ecological Managers, I think. So there's some stuff. So I think if we were to do this kind of meeting or in the field meetings, I'm sure we could come up very quickly with a list, probably too many meetings to fill a season even, who knows. But let's see how it goes. And so I think the two things, we'll be back in touch with you really soon about if you're happy for your contact details to be shared. And then we'll be back in touch with you as soon as we can about maybe what an informal network might look like, and an initial meeting, perhaps at some stage like this in late January, to see whether we can actually say, okay, we now have a, is it going to be a Devon network? I mean, that was, I don't want to open a question at the end of it, but you know, I'm conscious there are people from slightly over the border. So that's why I called it a local Devon networking, or Devon local. Yeah. So because it doesn't need to be boundary specific for those that are over the border. Okay. Thank you for your time. If there's anything else, do email me. By all means, drop me a line. But thank you for this evening. Thank you for your input. I hope it was useful, and I hope something comes of it, and we meet again. And let's hope that's face to face in a field somewhere where we can actually talk about habitat and biodiversity restoration, stroke rewilding. Thank you very much, folks. If there's nothing else, I'll say cheery bye. Okay. Thank you for your time. Cheerio.